girlfriend told me she was pregnant, and I was ready to be a father until I found out she was actually carrying another man's baby, and she planned to use me because he wanted nothing to do with the child or any responsibility at all forever after. I was 21 when this started, and I assure you, that age is like another lifetime away now, even though it's just a couple of years. I felt then that I had it all sorted out, or at least enough of life sus to not make the kinds of mistakes that would cost me for the rest of my life. My name is Elias, and I am from a small town in Kentucky where people know your parents, and your grandparents, and sometimes even still call you by your family name instead of your own. I had an older sister, Corinna, who was 26 and married with a baby of her own at the time, and my little brother Miles, who was just turning 17 and considered himself already grown up. My parents were hardworking people. Dad had a small auto repair shop and Mom taught 4th grade, but they constantly told me, "Don't rush life, Eli, there's time for everything." I never paid attention. I met her, Raina, in a coffee shop just off campus during my 2nd year of community college. She was 20, a cosmetology student, with these piercing dark eyes that made you think she was actually listening to you even if you were only talking about the weather. I fell for her fast, like humiliatingly fast, and before weeks passed, I was driving her to classes and sitting in the waiting room with her like a lovesick teen despite the fact that I'd been instructed to work part-time at my uncle's hardware store. My friends said I was moving too quickly, but I thought they were just jealous, because at last, for the first time in my life, a girl like she, intelligent, charming, funny, was choosing me. We'd been dating for about 7 months when she sat me down one evening in her small rented apartment, and told me she had something to tell me. I can remember now how her voice shook, how she refused to look at me, just kind of stared at the chipped paint on the windowsill, and played with her hair coiled tightly around her finger. She says to me, "Eli, I'm pregnant," and I assure you the room stopped spinning. I was shocked, of course, but for some reason I was not angry or even scared then. I had always wanted to be a dad one day, and something just clicked inside, like, this was my chance to toughen up, to become the kind of father my own father was to me. I embraced her, told her I'd be there with her every step of the way, that we could do this, and I meant it. She cried into my shirt and told me she was scared, and I told her she wouldn't have to do it alone. I told my parents 2 days later, bracing myself for disappointment, but to my surprise, Dad just sighed and said, "Well, looks like you're about to learn life the hard way." And Mom hugged me and said she'd support me no matter what. Corinna was over the moon, already planning baby showers, and even Miles was bragging to his friends that he would be an uncle before he graduated from high school. For a few weeks, it felt like we were building something real, talking about names, imagining the little nursery we could have in her apartment, plotting how I'd take on extra hours at the shop to cover diapers and formula. But little cracks started to form. Raina became moody, distant from time to time, and I attributed it to hormones, to stress, to the fact that she was young and overwhelmed. I convinced myself I'd just remain patient and tough for her. One evening, roughly a month since she had informed me, I received a text message from this guy I did not know very well. This guy named Carter who would sometimes frequent one of my classes but in no way considered to be my friend. The text message simply read, "You should know the baby isn't yours, man." My gut hit the floor. I stared at my phone for what seemed like hours, trying to figure out if it was some sort of cruel joke. But part of me, way back in my mind, had already questioned something was not right. I spoke to her the following day. I wasn't upset when I went in initially. I simply asked her straight out if there was something that she was hiding from me. She did freeze, and then she laughed this nervous laugh and said I should not believe Carter because he was a liar, a troublemaker, that I shouldn't trust anything he said, and I so wanted to believe her, so I did. I pushed the doubt aside, reminded myself that folks do get jealous and try to ruin good things, and I reassured her as she cried about how the people were out to get her. But the seed was planted, and once you plant a seed like this, it takes root. I started noticing things I hadn't observed before, how she sidestepped answering certain questions, how she never allowed me to go with her to her doctor's appointments, how she flinched when I spoke of the future. I kept reminding myself that love was all about trust, and I kept on trying, but the disquieting doubt proved too much. Around 2 weeks later, I found out the hard way. I was standing there waiting for her to come home from work, and her phone buzzed on the couch next to me. I shouldn't have looked, I know that, but something in me just gave way. I grabbed it, and it was a chain of messages from a number headed, no last name. The text gave me the queasy feeling. "Told you I want nothing to do with it. You take care of it. Don't call me back." And then the calls, begging, pleading with him not to leave her alone in this. My whole body felt paralyzed. I sat there until she walked in, and when she saw me holding her phone, her face went white like she had seen a ghost. I talked softly with her. "Whose baby is it?" She didn't answer then, and when I pushed her, she fell apart, crying harder than I'd ever seen anyone cry. Between sobs she admitted it was his, that she'd spent the previous night with him, and when she found out she was pregnant, he told her directly he didn't want the baby, didn't want her, didn't want the responsibility. And so she approached me. She explained that she was certain I'd be a good father, that I'd care for the baby enough to do it even if it wasn't mine, and she convinced herself it was the right thing to do. I have no words for the feeling of what had rushed through me in that moment. It was beyond anger or sorrow. It was betrayal on a scale I'd never known. I thought of all those late-night shows, all those plans that we had made, all those vows, and suddenly everything felt like a lie. I wanted to know if she'd ever loved me, and she couldn't answer. She just continued to say, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," as if words could erase what she'd done. I left her apartment that night and drove for hours, without even having a clue where I was going, just driving the same roads, attempting to comprehend how my life had turned everything around in a span of less than a month. That night, after I had cruised around until my gas was nearly depleted, I wound up pulling into this old riverfront park where I used to go as a kid. It was serene. The only noise to be heard was water moving underneath the bridge and 2 streetlights that were dimming. I sat there in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles hurt, trying not to cry but crying anyway. I wasn't mourning the relationship, I was mourning the future I'd already started building in my head, the crib I'd pictured we'd put up together, the child I'd pictured would be mine, the way I'd pictured coming home with a little boy or girl to meet my parents, making my mom a grandma again, and seeing my dad's tough face soften the way it had when he'd held Karina's baby for the first time. It was as if losing a child I never even had. I never slept that night, and by morning the sun came up. I drove home straight to my parents' place. Mom was home making coffee in the kitchen when I got there, and she could tell right away that something was wrong. I don't know why, but when she asked, "What happened?" I just cracked. I told her everything. About Reina lying, about the baby not being mine, about how she had asked me to care for it anyway because the father was not interested in anything to do with it. My mom just stood there grasping the coffee pot as if she'd forgotten she was pouring and then set it down and hugged me so tight it hurt. She said, "Eli, you don't have to carry someone else's mess. You don't." When Dad came back from the shop later, he was angry, not with me, but with her. He just paced, grumbling, "Making use of my boy like that, no sense of shame." My sister Karina came over with her baby perched on her hip, and she told me she never liked Reina, that she always felt that something was not right. Then when it happened it sort of irritated me because it seemed like she was being all, "I told you so," but inside I knew she was only protective. The worst part, however, was breaking the news to Miles. He idolized me, thought I was holding it all together, and when I let him in on the fact that it was all a lie, he sat there silently for a long time before he said to me, "That's messed up, Eli. Real messed up." And it was. I dodged Reina's calls and texts for days. She showed up at the shop one day, waiting by my car, begging me to talk to her. She informed me that she was scared, that she had no idea what to do, that she thought if anyone could possibly love the baby, it would be me. I wanted to scream at her, but I could not even get words out. I just told her, "You should have been honest with me from the very beginning." And then I stood there and left her sobbing, drove away in my truck. But the thing with love, or is it just the thing with being 21 and naive, is that it doesn't shut off in 24 hours. I couldn't get her out of my head, the way we'd used to make each other laugh. The way she'd curl up next to me on the couch when we watched movies, the way she once said that I made her feel safe. And despite knowing that the baby wasn't mine, a part of me still belonged to her, still felt responsible in some manner. I started having these dreams that I was holding the baby, that I was showing them how to ride a bike, that I could hear them call out, "Dad," and every time I woke up I felt like something had been ripped out of my chest. I told myself I was done, that I needed to stop it completely. But then she'd send me a text with just, "Please, I need you," and I'd start to crumble. My friends caught on. One night my friend Nolan took me out for beers, sat me down, and said, "Listen man, you can't save her. You can't save that kid. You'll drown yourself if you attempt." I dismissed it, but it stuck with me. Was I going to drown my whole life trying to fix something that wasn't even mine? Weeks went by, and then one evening, Reina's mom phoned me. I didn't even know she had my number, but she did. Her voice was shaking, and she told me Reina had been struggling, that she was terrified of delivering the baby alone, that she was calling out my name over and over again as if I were the only one who'd ever cared. I didn't know what to say. A portion of me was eager to hang up the phone, but another portion was saturated with this crushing guilt. Like maybe I was abandoning her at her most vulnerable. I went back to see her the next day. She was on her couch, spent, her eyes red as if she hadn't slept in forever. When she saw me, she started crying again and whispered, "I'm sorry, Eli. I ought to have informed you. I simply did not wish to lose you. And perhaps I am a fool for placing beside her, holding her hand, and for the first time in weeks, not being angry. I just felt drained, broken, but somehow still connected to her. She said more of the father, called Adrian. He was 24, worked in construction, and had nothing to do with her after she told him she was pregnant. She said he blocked her, wouldn't return her calls, said point blank, "Not my problem." When I listened to his name, heard how ruthless he was, I was sick. I couldn't help but think, how can a man just walk away like that? How could he leave her and the baby by themselves? And then that understanding that followed was what made me even sick. If he would not stand up, and I would not stand up, then what would that baby become? Would they be raised unwanted, unloved? That night, in spite of every shred of sense, I was telling her, I don't know if I ever can forgive you, but I cannot turn my back on the baby. And I was sincere when I said it. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about the kid, this innocent life that had no concept it was getting drawn into all of this. She gripped my hand and said, "You're a good man, Eli. Good as him." I didn't say anything, because to my thinking, I wasn't good or just a fool. For a brief period after that, things kind of reverted to being in working order. Or at least that we were pretending hard enough to deceive ourselves. I started going along with Raina to some of her doctor appointments, though every time I sat in those waiting rooms, I got this mix of pride and shame. Like I was playing in someone else's play that wasn't mine, but somehow I'd gotten pulled in anyway. The worst was the ultrasound. It was this otherworldly experience when they put that cold gel on her stomach and I heard for the first time the baby's heartbeat. It was forceful and fast, and it affected me somehow. I expected to feel disconnected, but instead it struck me in the chest, as if my own heart knew that sound despite the voice in my head repeatedly telling me, "That's not your kid." Raina took my hand and breathlessly said, "See, you're already bonded," and I didn't protest. I merely nodded because protesting would have meant leaving, and I wasn't about to do that. My parents weren't pleased when I informed them that I was still engaged. Dad stared at me like that, like he couldn't even see me, and he said, "Son, loyalty is one thing, but getting used is another." Mom was softer, explaining she understood why I couldn't abandon it all but begging me to look at what I'd be sacrificing. School, my future, even my own chance to be a dad one day to a child that would really be my own. Karina was candid as always. She said to me, "You're stupid, Eli. Love isn't about sacrificing your whole damn life for someone who has lied to you." I rejected them all, but their words got lodged and reverberated within my mind. But I kept going back to Raina's apartment, kept shopping for her groceries, kept massaging her back when she was sick, kept lying awake at night imagining how it would be when the baby was born and I held them in my arms. I think I was clinging to this idea that maybe if I loved enough, if I hung around long enough, some way the baby would know me as his, that love would conquer biology. But the world is a cruel thing and catches up with you. I ran into Adrian, the actual father, in a gas station of all things one Saturday afternoon. I didn't even recognize him initially, but when he glared at me, he smirked like he knew exactly who I was. He was taller than I was, broad shoulders, hard hands, and this arrogant swaggering. He approached me and said, "So you're the dad playing dumb, right?" I was frozen there. I wanted to punch him, but all I did was ask, "Why don't you step up? Why can't you take the responsibility?" And he laughed, really laughed, the kind that stings, and replied, "Because I don't have to. You're doing it already." I swear my blood boiled. I told him he was a coward, that someday he'd be sorry. But he shrugged and left like he hadn't just shattered whatever illusion I was still clinging to. I drove straight on to Raina's after that, furious, shaking, ready to tell her I was done. But by the time I got there, she was on the floor surrounded by baby clothes someone had given to her, holding up a small onesie with tears streaming down her face. She looked at me and barely whispered, "Isn't it cute?" And I couldn't do it. I couldn't go. I simply sat down next to her and hugged her as she sobbed, although my own chest felt like it would literally split open. A few weeks later, things were only more complicated. Raina's moods were in worse shape, and she started snapping at me, telling me I didn't love her, that I was only staying because I felt guilty. Maybe she was right. I didn't know anymore. I'd leave my car in front of her flat, staring at the door, wondering whether to get out or drive away for good. Every time that I almost pushed off, I'd remember this pulse, the rhythm of life that had burrowed its way into my heart, and I couldn't just abandon it. The tension was suffocating me, though. I cut out my friends from my life. I started missing school half of the time. My boss at the hardware store spoke to me one day and said, "Eli, you're not yourself. You're distracted, sloppy. Get your head together." And I wanted to, but how could I? I was 21, and it was all revolving around a lie that I did not know how to let go of. The wake-up call was the night I'll never forget when Raina made a confession that sucked the air right out of me. We were in a fight. She'd accused me of not loving her enough because I'd forgotten to pick her up ice cream she'd specifically requested. And in the middle of yelling she shouted, "You think you're the only one I'd consider? Adrian doesn't want the baby, but other boys would have done it too. You're not special, Eli. You're just the guy who remained." It hurt. For all my dedication, for all my compliance, to hear that I was just an effortless option, it broke something inside of me. I left that night, slammed the door so hard the frame creaked, and drove until I was 2 towns out. I slept in my car in an abandoned church parking lot, and in the morning, it was like my chest was filled with ashes. I made the hardest decision of my life that morning. I went to her apartment, took the things I had left there, my hoodie, a few books, the toothbrush in her bathroom, and I told her I couldn't keep going. She screamed, begged, said I was abandoning her and the baby, but I would not hear. I told her, "You deceived me, manipulated me, and now you expect me to sacrifice my future for a child that is not even mine. I cannot. I will not." She threw a glass against the wall. It shattered behind me, and I walked out without a backward glance. But here's the thing. I didn't feel relieved. I felt hollow. I couldn't take my eyes away from her face, her crying, and that stupid heartbeat that kept echoing in my head. I knew I'd made the right call, but I also knew the guilt would haunt me, because no matter what, a baby was coming into this world, and I'd given my word once to be there, and now I wasn't. The months after I walked out on Raina were some of the most difficult of my life. I thought leaving would free me, that I'd wake up the next morning lighter, be able to breathe again without all the lies and the weight on my shoulders. But instead of this, I carried this nagging guilt wherever I went. I'd be in class and find myself wondering if she was okay, if the baby was healthy, if she was eating enough. I'd be shelving stock at the hardware store and picture her by herself in that apartment, folding baby clothes by herself, and my stomach would twist into knots. I never uttered a word to anyone about how much it was taking out of me, not even my family. They thought I had finally woken up, that I was getting on with things. But they didn't get any of the nights I stayed awake staring at the ceiling, reliving every conversation, every promise, questioning whether I had failed an unmarked test of what it meant to be a man. I even drove past her apartment building once, about a month before the due date, just to see if she was okay. I cruised down the street like some stalker and watched the lights bobbing up and down in her windows. I could make out shadows drifting around in there, maybe her mom stopping by, maybe a friend, I don't know. I longed so desperately to beat on the door, to check in on her, but I stayed in the car until my chest hurt too badly, then drove off into the night. The baby was born late spring. I found out because one of her friends had put a picture up on the internet. This little blue-blanketed boy, this smashed-up face that had managed to tighten my throat even though I had no claim on him. She had called him Jonah. I must have gazed at this photograph for an hour at least, my phone buzzing with messages and notifications as my eyes misted up with tears. He wasn't my own, but I was connected to him, as though a part of me had been removed and placed into another life that I could never be a part of. I didn't cry out for him, though. I settled back into my seat, justifying that it was better this way, that she had to find her way on her own. Despite all that, I'd hear something on the grapevine in our small town that she was in arrears, that Adrian had never even made one appearance, that she was counting a lot on her mom but doing what she could. I tried to convince myself it wasn't my issue, but honestly, I couldn't help thinking about that baby almost every day. I thought of how fast things could have gone otherwise, how I'd almost stepped into another life where I was his father. There were moments that I would dream of other lives for me, alternate me's where I stayed, where I looked beyond the betrayal and still chose the baby. Those fantasies had me exhausted but triumphant, holding Jonah in my arms, introducing him to my family, maybe even being able to forgive Raina. But then reality would intrude on me, reality that informed me forgiveness wouldn't have erased the lie, wouldn't have made him mine, wouldn't have stopped her from looking me dead in the eye and admitting I was just the guy who hung around. That truth was always the hardest. A year passed, when I was 22, and I changed schools and moved several hours away to a university. I told myself that I did deserve a do-over, somewhere no one knew my story, where I wasn't that guy who almost raised someone else's kid. College gave me diversions, new classes, new friends, parties that all merged together. But late at night, I'd still find myself scrolling back to that old picture of Jonah, hidden discreetly on my phone. I never showed it to anyone. It was my own scar, a reminder of what almost occurred. The rough edges mellowed over time. I formed new friends, went on some dates, even laughed once more without that hollow feeling behind me. But deep down, that experience shaped me in ways nothing else ever had. It kept me cautious, slower to trust, perhaps even colder at times. If someone would ask me why I was being so secretive, I'd simply shake my head and say, bad experience. Because how do you explain something like that? How do you explain almost creating a life on a lie, nearly giving your childhood to a child that didn't belong to you, and walking away being both saving yourself and leaving behind an innocent person at the same time? It's been a few years, I guess, and sometimes I still catch myself thinking, where are they? What are they doing? I wonder if Jonah has his mother's eyes, if he'll ever question things about the man who showed up at the doctor visits and then disappeared. I wonder if Raina says anything to him about me, or if my name is erased from their story altogether. Maybe that is for the best. Perhaps the most compassionate thing I ever did was depart before I got him confused further. Yet, on still evenings, when the world moves slower, I find myself thinking about the beating of that heartbeat on the ultrasound, the one that got under my skin before I even knew it. It rings beautifully in my mind like a song stuck in my head, reminding me that love can become complicated, messy, and painful, that sometimes doing what's right doesn't necessarily feel right. I don't know if I was a hero or if I was just scared. I don't know if I left to save myself or if I failed them both. All I'm aware of is that at 21, I was convinced I was ready to be a father, and instead, I learned the feeling of losing something that was never mine in the first place. And that's a lesson, one that I will take for the remainder of my days.